Trump has a connection to Sean Hannity. This just gets weirder and weirder by the minute. You sure you don't want to stay? Because this is...
Stay tuned. I'm going to be on at 5 o'clock, so you can come. We will have it sorted out completely at 5 o'clock.
Well, eat your Wheaties for the next couple of hours. Thank you, Katie. Thanks. Unbelievable developments. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ali Velshi. We're still trying to sort through this while the president is on his way to his Mar-a-Lago estate in preparation for a visit from the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Missing from the president's comments so far today, any mention of the latest controversy surrounding his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, who, as you know, is in court right now, or any comment from the president about fired FBI Director James Comey, who's been making the rounds in the media. The president has tweeted about James Comey, but hasn't talked about him just now. I just want to repeat this for those of you who didn't hear it moments ago. NBC News has confirmed that Michael Cohen's third client is Fox News host Sean Hannity. Earlier, Cohen and his own lawyers, as well as an attorney for President Trump, appeared in a courtroom in Manhattan, continuing to argue over the FBI raids last week on the embattled lawyer's office in this building, his home, and a hotel room in which he had been staying. Also in court today, Stormy Daniels and her lawyer, Michael Avenatti. But as we mentioned, a blockbuster court hearing going on right now in downtown Manhattan. Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, is fighting to keep prosecutors from going through all the material they seized from his home and his hotel room and his office last week. Prosecutors revealed in a court filing on Friday that Cohen has been under criminal investigation for months. He hasn't been charged with any crime. He denies any wrongdoing, but we are learning a lot of new details in this case. His lawyers claimed, again, in a court filing today, more than a dozen electronic devices and other items were seized during the raids last week. They also revealed that Cohen provided legal advice to just 3 clients in 2017 and 2018, and here they are. The first is President Trump. The second, Elliot Broidy, the Republican Party's former deputy finance chairman. Cohen, who's, by the way, also on the Republican Finance Committee, arranged a payment to a woman who claimed she got pregnant as a result of an affair with Broidy. Now, moments ago, once again, we have learned that the third client is Fox News host Sean Hannity. But the courtroom today is packed with some big names. President Trump's attorneys are there. They want the judge to give Cohen copies of all seized material so that he can identify things that may involve the president and be protected by attorney-client privilege. Also in the courtroom, Stormy Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford. There she is walking in. She created quite a scene when she arrived about an hour ago. Cohen paid that woman $130,000 days before the 2016 election to remain silent about an alleged affair with Donald Trump that took place in 2006. The White House has denied the affair. Investigators reportedly seized documents about that payoff, and just hours ago, her attorney talked about why she is there.
I think it's important because she's dedicated to the cause, and she wants to make sure that the American people know all the facts and get all the information and documents at their disposal so they can make a determination as to who's telling the truth.
Okay, you're excused if this is hard to follow, because I've just given you a whole lot of information all at once, but I've got some people to help us make sense of it. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Katie Phang is with us, but right outside that courtroom in Manhattan, the guy with his finger on this story is Tom Winter. Tom, what has just happened?
So, Ali, what just happened is that, as you mentioned before, this morning we knew that Michael Cohen in the last 2 years has represented President Trump. Of course, he's his personal attorney. We also knew from a court filing that he represented Elliot Broidy. The third person was unidentified in Michael Cohen's team, would not identify him. They did not want to identify him in court. One of the attorneys said, we are protecting that name because that person doesn't want to be associated with this case. The judge wasn't buying his arguments as far as the reason why the name should be protected and not be said in open court. She said, I'm going to rule right now that it must be disclosed, and the name is Sean Hannity. The person, obviously, Sean Hannity is a Fox News anchor, and so it's been revealed in open court that within the last 2 years, in 2017 and 2018, and either or both of those years, Sean Hannity has used the services in a legal setting. Sean Hannity has used the services of Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen. So that's the information that we know right now. The hearing is still going on in court behind me and with Judge Kimba Wood. Right now, the sides are going back and forth, Ali, as to whether or not a special master should be put into play. That kind of means like a referee to decide whether or not the documents and some of the items seized from Michael Cohen should go to prosecutors, or whether they should be privileged, whether or not Mr. Cohen should be able to have access to the documents first and then let the government know which items they should have access to, or whether or not the government can have what they call a privilege team or a filter team to go through his documents, the items seized from a search warrant literally 1 week ago, whether or not the government can then decide which items are under privilege or not, and then pass that along to the investigating team. So those arguments, and that's the whole reason why we're down here in the first place, that is ongoing. But we wanted to come out here and tell you that the third client that President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, has represented in the last 2 years is, in fact, Sean Hannity.
All right. And the Wall Street Journal has got a quote from Sean Hannity in response to him being named in court. Michael Cohen has said, Sean Hannity says of Michael Cohen, "We've been friends a long time. I've sought legal advice from Michael." Possibly the shortest 2 sentences Sean Hannity has ever uttered. Let me ask Katie Phang. Katie, I don't even know what to think about this, but there are several questions. The first of which is, does the fact that Michael Cohen represented 3 people in 2017, one of which is Sean Hannity, is that significant?
Well, I mean, other than it being mind-blowing and unexpected, I mean, the lawyers for Cohen were trying to fight the disclosure pretty harshly in court with the judge, and the judge made a decision right there on the bench to say, no, you got to disclose it now. And she very astutely said, Allie, that the legal standard was not meant to hide the identity of that client. And so she said, disclose it. And so they did. So it kind of makes you now wonder why, right? Why would Sean Hannity need legal advice from the fixer who is known as Michael Cohen, especially in light of what we know about what Michael Cohen has done for not only Donald Trump, but for Elliot Broidy? And
Tom, we don't know why, right? There was no, Kimba Wood, the judge, didn't cause Michael Cohen to explain why he had Sean Hannity as a client.
Yeah, no. I mean, there was no overt, and Michael Cohen is yet to speak, to my knowledge, yet in the hearing. It's obviously still going on behind me, and I'm not in the courtroom. But his attorney said we are protecting that name because that person didn't want to be associated with this case. The case being obviously the search warrant motion that's been brought by Michael Cohen. So that's the only reason that his attorneys provided as far as why they wanted to either file that under a seal. They asked for the judge's assurance. An attorney for media companies stood up and protested whether or not this name should be filed under seal, saying there was no legal purpose for it. And that's what the judge said. There was no legal reasoning that she found why this name shouldn't become public. And so that's the reason why she ordered it to be disclosed right there on the spot. And Cohen's attorneys had to say it right in open court.
So let's explore this just for a second, Katie. Does a court not have to tell an attorney why there would be a legal reason for simply naming their clients? If I have an attorney, is there any protection I have, regardless of attorney-client privilege? Do I have the protection of not being known to be an attorney's client?
As a general proposition, the attorney-client privilege runs to communications between the attorney and the client. And more accurately, the attorney-client privilege is held by the client, him or herself. Ergo, the reason why you have Trump there. And in fact, we did learn that the Trump organization had lawyers there as well today at the court hearing. And so there are protections usually afforded to that privilege. But if the legal standard is not met, meaning there's no legal sound reasoning why you have to hide the identity, there are cases, Allie, where you actually have to disclose when you retained your attorney, and the judge can order that to happen. And so it's not odd that she didn't ask the lawyers for Michael Cohen, why did Sean Hannity use Michael Cohen?
Right.
But it also is okay that she said, look, you have to disclose it now. There's no legal reason why not to. And then I like the fact that the hearing is obviously continuing, because if you dial back all of the drama that's just erupted because we just found out Sean Hannity used Michael Cohen, of all people, as his lawyer, the reality is the privilege itself is at issue, and whether or not they're going to allow this special master to get the first bite at the proverbial apple versus the lawyers for Michael Cohen and or Donald Trump.
I mean, it is just staggering news. You heard me telling Katie Tur I didn't want her to go. I wanted her to just stay there so I can just keep on asking questions. Sure. Stay right where you two are. Danny Savalas has just joined me on set. Danny, please give us some context here. This was just not what we were expecting. There's more media at this court than there are for most cases, because we're expecting a lot. We know Michael Avenatti is there with his client, Stormy Daniels. We know Michael Cohen is there. We know that Michael Cohen does not want the court to start rifling through all the stuff they got from his office, his home, and his hotel room last week. None of us expected this outcome, that there's a third client, which we knew there was a third client for Michael Cohen, and that it is Sean Hannity. And the relevance here is that Sean Hannity probably doesn't miss an hour in which he is either praising or defending Donald Trump in the public domain, and he has a lot of adherents and a lot of followers.
Consider the cost here. Now, Michael Cohen and Trump wanted this court to grant a motion or a request to have either the court review documents or have the Michael Cohen and his team review them personally. Now, to get to that point, the court said, well, you have to tell us who you're protecting. And that leads to the revelation that it's Sean Hannity. And now consider this. Had they just accepted the taint team would have looked at something that involved Sean Hannity and said, well, you know what? This clearly doesn't involve anything
because everybody's interested in this. The taint team is a group employed by...
Exactly. So the taint team is a group of U.S. attorneys in this case that are separated from the underlying investigation. That way, there's no risk of taint. If they find attorney-client privileged information, they can return it to Michael Cohen without the underlying investigators finding out about it.
And that would have been the plan. The taint team would have reviewed the evidence. Michael Cohen was not, and his lawyers were not satisfied with that. They wanted a different remedy.
So then suppose, for example, and we have to consider that Sean Hannity may have just been seeking advice, legal advice from Michael Cohen, and maybe he sent him an email and said, hey, what should I do about A, B, C, or D? And Michael Cohen might have responded. Now, the taint team would have looked at that and said, well, this is clearly privileged communications, and it doesn't have anything to do with our investigation. Let's return that to Michael Cohen. Instead, now, because of this all-out battle to get either the court to appoint a special master or allow Michael Cohen's team to make that first review, which is not a likely outcome, now at what a cost, they've revealed that it is Sean Hannity who is that third non-disclosed client. Here's what you need to know. The fact that, or the identity of a client is not itself attorney-client privileged. However, under the rules of ethics, an attorney may breach his duty of confidentiality. Rule 1.6, all attorneys are familiar with it. An attorney can breach that duty of keeping confidential information about that client. That is different than attorney-client privilege. The privilege does not attach as to the mere identity of the client.
So the fact that someone is someone's client is not privileged. That's not necessarily protected. It doesn't have to be out in the open.
That's right. But I may, as an attorney, have an independent duty of confidentiality, especially where you, as the client, have said to me, hey, listen, the fact that I'm seeking representation or even legal advice could be damaging to my reputation. Therefore, I'm asking you not to tell anyone. In fact, the rules err on the side of caution. They say if you haven't explicitly gotten consent, a general rule of thumb is do not disclose that somebody's your client unless everybody already knows that that person is your client.
So, Katie, this does speak to an issue here, and we don't know how long Sean Hannity has been Michael Cohen's client, how far back their relationship goes. He did give a statement to the Wall Street Journal that says, we've been friends a long time. I've sought legal advice from Michael. We don't know if that relationship is because of Donald Trump, but the bottom line is there is, to use the term taint differently than the court uses it, it's not handy for Sean Hannity to be associated with the idea that Michael Cohen is in there and a whole lot of documents pertaining to his clients are in front of this court, and there are 3 clients, 2 of whom have been alleged to have done wrong things.
Yeah, listen, the reason why the lawyers for Cohen said that they didn't want to disclose the identity of Sean Hannity was, quote, because the client, Sean Hannity, didn't want to be affiliated with the proceeding. And you can't blame him. This is not some litigation over a real estate deal that never closed. I mean, this is an ongoing criminal investigation by the Southern District of New York upon a referral from Bob Mueller as to the personal and financial dealings of Michael Cohen. And that is exactly where the government prevailed, because Cohen's lawyers made a big stink about the fact that they wanted to protect the attorney-client relationships, and yet there's 3 whopping clients that were disclosed today, and the judge, the judge herself is like, okay, so who are your clients? And this back and forth between the government and Michael Cohen's lawyers ended up exactly like Danny said, ending up paying a huge price for Michael Cohen. But at the end of the day, the judge is going to rule. I'm confident that the judge is going to rule imminently on whether or not those documents are going to be reviewed, the materials, the cell phones. I mean, there was a lot that was seized, and that is exactly what they're trying to fight. According to Michael Cohen and Donald Trump's lawyers, quote, everything was taken. everything.
The electronics, safety deposit box was looked at. All sorts of documents at a house, a hotel room, and office. I want to bring Gabe Sherman in. Vanity Fair's Gabe Sherman is also an MSNBC contributor. Gabe, what do you make of this? You, of course, have covered Fox News very closely. It is no secret, nor should it be a secret to anybody, that there's a close relationship between Fox News and President Trump. Probably none closer than that between Sean Hannity and President Trump. But we didn't know it was this close. We didn't know they share a lawyer.
Yeah, it is a pretty remarkable development, although not entirely surprising when you actually connect the dots. You know, this is a very fast-moving story, so I'm going to be doing a lot more reporting. But what I have heard so far is that at some point last year, Sean Hannity hired Michael Cohen to help defend him against left-wing groups that were calling for boycotts sort of in the wake of Bill O'Reilly's ouster from Fox News under pressure from advertisers and left-wing groups. My sources said Hannity got very, quote, paranoid and hired Cohen and perhaps other lawyers and/or private investigators to look into these groups that were calling for boycotts and trying to get Hannity off the air. Now, this could be very interesting because oftentimes private investigators are hired by law firms because it allows attorney-client privilege to be maintained. So there is a scenario in which if they've seized Michael Cohen's documents, inadvertently, we might be able to learn to what degree did Sean Hannity try to go after his enemies with shady tactics like private investigators.
All right, Tom, I want to go back to Tom Winter, who's standing in front of this court, because in addition to this bombshell announcement, there's actually a lot of important things that are going to get decided in that court today. The most important of which, as Katie Phang says, is whether or not Michael Cohen and his lawyers get their way, and somebody other than that U.S. Attorney Taint team gets to review these documents to determine the relevance to what they were searched for.
So, Ali, I've covered enough federal trials and federal hearings to know that never to guess what a judge is going to decide, but it seemed as though the judge had some pretty serious concerns over the special master, which was kind of the next best solution that was offered by Michael Cohen. Essentially, the judge was questioning that in that case, the special master has to provide a little bit of a log and a little bit of background contextual information about the reasons why they didn't want to include certain communications or certain documents, why they didn't want to give those to the government so they could use on their investigative team. And one of the concerns that came up in some of the case law that was cited in the case said that when they involve a special master, it tends to tremendously prolong the process. And the representative for the United States Attorney's Office, AUSA McKay, told the court that they had serious concerns that either by using a special master or by Michael Cohen having a chance to look at these documents and deciding for himself what was attorney-client privilege and what was relevant to federal prosecutors, that would tremendously delay the case. And his concern was that any long delays in the investigative and possible prosecution process in this case could really slow down the overall judicial process and could really be an advantage for Michael Cohen. So that was kind of the argument that was going on back and forth before obviously the information in Sean Hannity's name was disclosed.
Katie Phang, let me just ask you, based on what we heard from Gabe Sherman a couple minutes ago about why Sean Hannity, possibly facing these boycotts, would have wanted a lawyer. There's nobody who thinks Michael Cohen is necessarily the best lawyer at what he does. He is more often referred to as a fixer, in fact. He's a friend and a guy who makes things go away. Does that make sense to you that Sean Hannity, one of the highest paid and most high-profile journalists in the country, would think that if he's got those type of problems that Michael Cohen is the guy for him?
Maybe it's because he bent the ear of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump told him, you can use my fixer, the guy who does everything for me. As we know, Cohen's been the lawyer for Donald Trump for several years. Ali, remember recently we've heard a very similar kind of tactic, which was in the Harvey Weinstein scandal, where a law firm utilized a private investigative firm to be able to track down detractors, to be able to locate people that were ostensibly victims, to be able to dissuade them, if not silence them from coming forward. I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily what's happened with Sean Hannity, and I guess we'll find out more as time evolves. But again, the affiliation or the guilt by association that Sean Hannity now has by being identified as a client of Michael Cohen, and only one of three, that's a really telling thing. Only one of three is very significant. I think Sean Hannity is probably going to end up giving more than a two-sentence statement as to why what's going on. But underlying all of this, Ali, please don't forget, it is a privileged situation. He is a client of attorney Michael Cohen, and if it has nothing to do with the underlying criminal investigation, then it really shouldn't be anybody's business, frankly, what was going on between the two of them.
And this is an interesting point, right? Because there's just nothing other than the fact that we know that he's a client that we can discuss here, because we don't know what it is, and we certainly don't know if it's relevant to any of the stuff that's going on in that courtroom and the search that the FBI made of Michael Cohen's office and residence and home. And we may not know that.
We don't know. And if you're Sean Hannity, you're secretly rooting for the government to have won, for it to have never gotten to this point. Because, and I can't stress it enough, had the government prevailed, if the court had just decided this issue without a hearing, then the government would have had the filter team in place. They would have reviewed the documents. They might have seen Sean Hannity's communications and said, well, this is clearly nothing to do with anything that we've investigated. This is the first we're seeing it. It's privileged. Therefore, it should be returned to Michael Cohen.
And there's a chance no one would have ever been any the wiser.
So if you're Sean Hannity, you're massively frustrated right now because this probably was not necessary. It was this fight by Cohen for really extraordinary relief, which is something that is, as far as I know, not been granted before, where the actual subject of the search warrant gets to review the documents and say, this, I think it's privileged. I think we probably shouldn't give this back to the government. You know, at the same time, Cohen's position is that the government would tend to think that nothing is privileged. But the difference here is that filter teams, taint teams, they've been around for a while. Courts have approved their use, but grudgingly, with skepticism. That being said, and again, I'm a criminal defense attorney, so I'm biased in this world, but if courts have approved it grudgingly, then likely as not, the court will eventually approve either use of a taint team or the special master, but the special master is going to really slow things down.
Gabe Sherman's still with me on the phone. Gabe knows Fox News. He knows the media better than most, but he certainly knows Fox News better than most. What do you make of what's going on? What do you think is going through Sean Hannity's head right now?
Well, clearly this is not a news cycle that you want to be a part of in the middle of Stormy Daniels, federal prosecutors, Donald Trump, and Michael Cohen. But, you know, to me, this is just another sign of the intricate connections that exist between Fox News and Donald Trump's orbit. You know, back when Roger Ailes was fighting to save his job in the summer of 2016, when he was being accused of sexual harassment, Donald Trump had called Ailes and had suggested the name of a lawyer. And in fact, Ailes was considering hiring, and it was not Michael Cohen, I should point out, it was another lawyer. And Ailes was considering that lawyer, but thought it would be too distracting if it came out that he was being represented by a Trump lawyer. But again, that's just a second example we now have of the now president of the United States, having a legal connection with a very prominent Fox News personality.
Kind of remarkable. Let's bring in Rebecca Ballhaus, who's a Wall Street Journal reporter who has broken this story and who got the comment from Sean Hannity. Maybe you're the best person to ask, Rebecca, as to what Sean Hannity is thinking right now. Did he give you anything more than the sentence that you've printed? We've been friends a long time. I sought legal advice from Michael Cohen.
No, I mean, that's the only statement he's given me so far, but he did note that he was in the middle of being on his radio show when the news broke, and I tuned into that shortly afterwards, and he mentioned that he's basically thinking about putting a statement out there, said it's very strange to watch my own television network with my name in the lower third. I think it certainly must be a strange experience to have this news revealed about yourself while you're in the middle of filming a 3-hour program. Right,
although if there are going to be television personalities in this country who are familiar with their names in the news, it would be Sean Hannity. As Gabe Sherman says, it's on one hand, this is a bombshell. On the other hand, this is a guy who is stuck very, very close to Donald Trump. Not the craziest thing in the world to imagine they share a lawyer.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, I think one of the more noteworthy things about this revelation is the fact that Hannity, of course, has spent months railing against this investigation, but particularly over the last week has been really critical of the FBI's decision to raid Michael Cohen's home, office, and hotel room, and has really questioned that decision. The fact that he has this tie to Michael Cohen, I think, raises questions about some of those statements that he's made.
Let me bring Gabe Sherman back into this for a second. To Rebecca's point about the relationship Sean Hannity has had with respect to both Donald Trump and talking about these investigations, does, in your opinion, because you know these Fox characters more than anyone, Gabe, does this change or have any impact on what Sean Hannity does from this moment on? He has been one of Donald Trump's most stalwart supporters through everything he has gone through. Does he have to do something differently now that his name's involved in this?
Well, I think clearly the conversations that are happening inside Fox News right now are this is now a network issue. He is going to have to make some sort of fuller disclosure than the short, brief statement he just released to the Wall Street Journal. And, you know, this is going to, in some ways, affect the ability to cover this story that he is now a part of. And, you know, the fact that he's defending Michael Cohen and Donald Trump for months and months on air without disclosing to his viewers that he is, in fact, defending his own personal lawyer that he has a financial relationship with, presumably, that becomes a journalistic issue. And now it's sort of sometimes a joke to sort of compare Sean Hannity to journalism. But I do know that there are those at Fox News who want to have standards, and I imagine they are going to pressure him to, I think recusing himself from the story would be far too extreme, but at a minimum, start including more disclosures about what his actual relationships are to the people who are being investigated by the special counsel and the Southern District of New York.
Yes, I made a reference to Sean Hannity as a journalist. I'm going to get run out of town by our viewers, according to what's going on my Twitter feed. Katie, lawyers have obligations when it comes to their clients, as we've discussed with Danny. Do clients have any obligations with respect to their lawyers? Why I ask this is, does Sean Hannity have any obligations when supporting Donald Trump in the investigation, when speaking about things, to say that the central character in the curiosity around Donald Trump right now happens to be Michael Cohen? Does Sean Hannity have to do anything about the fact that people now have to know? And by the way, he's my lawyer.
Well, again, the privilege, although it may not necessarily extend to the identity of the client for the lawyer, there's no onus, there's no responsibility for Sean Hannity to either promote or not promote who his lawyer is. That's his own business, and that's the reason why, you know, it's supposition in terms of the nature of the relationship, the work that was done, and absent the willingness of Sean Hannity as the holder of the privilege to want to discuss why was that relationship established between him and Michael Cohen, none of us will ever really know. Maybe perhaps a taint team from the U.S. Attorney's Office may know. But ultimately, Judge Kimba Wood is going to have to decide, putting aside whether Sean Hannity did or did not say the right things about Michael Cohen and Donald Trump and the raid on Michael Cohen's office, hotel room, and home. Judge Kimba Wood's going to have to say whether or not that existing relationship between Sean Hannity and Michael Cohen is an important enough a one that a special master needs to come in, get caught up to speed, and review all of the materials that have been seized, or whether it is okay per DOJ guidelines and pre-existing case law to allow the U.S. Attorney's Office to do its own investigation, parse out what is privilege per them, and then allow that to be debated. All
right, we're 30 minutes into this show, and I have to bring you the news that we got right at the top of the hour, and that is that we understood Michael Cohen to have had 3 clients in 2017. We knew one was Donald Trump, we knew the other one was Elliot Broidy, and we know the third one now is Sean Hannity, Fox News host. That information has just come out as a result of efforts made by Michael Cohen's attorneys to review some of the information that was gleaned during raids on his office in this building, plus a home and a hotel room last week. The point was that Cohen was trying to get the court to say some of this information is privileged, you shouldn't see it. The judge insisted on knowing who he is either protecting or who his clients are, and it was sort of forced out of his attorney that the third client is Sean Hannity. This has happened within the last 30 minutes. I want to go to Tom Winter, who's been covering this from the court. Now, Tom, we don't know what the Judge Kimba Wood or what the taint team or what the FBI knows about Sean Hannity's relationship with Michael Cohen. For instance, we don't know why Sean Hannity is a client of Michael Cohen or what he asked for. Sean Hannity told Rebecca Ballhaus from the Wall Street Journal that about Michael Cohen, We have been friends for a long time. I've sought legal advice from Michael. But we don't know anything more about it than that. Is that correct?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So it actually came up in court, and the government told the court and told the judge that, in fact, in this case, they have not had an opportunity, or at least the investigative team has not had an opportunity to go through any of the documents, items seized, cell phones, computer hard drives, etc. So at this point, the investigative team, which is in court today, and they have not said that they know exactly what that relationship may be. They say they haven't even had a chance to get word from any sort of privilege team as to whether or not there's anything in there that relates to Sean Hannity or anything else for that matter. So at this point, they're kind of just as in the dark as we are. We know that they took 10 boxes of documents from Mr. Cohen's office and his various residences. So we know that they have that. We know they have hard drives, as I said before, and as well as cell phone devices. Interestingly, Ali, they said that they were able to image those devices on site. So I'll explain what that is. That means they were able to get a accurate and true copy of those hard drives and of those computers on site. So they didn't actually physically remove those systems from Mr. Cohen's office or from his residences. So at this point, he has access to those documents. So presumably he knows what investigators have. So that's an interesting development that we had, obviously, before the Sean Hannity news. And so at this point, it was news to the court, news to the judge, and presumably news to the investigative team, as well as to obviously all of us reporters, that the third client that Michael Cohen represented. And I think I want to point out, Ali, this is in the last 2 years. This is in 2017 and 2018. They were very specific to this time period. So that was the time period that Mr. Hannity sought Cohen's services.
Tom, were you in the court when that news came out?
I was. We have a couple of courts going on today. Some of us that regularly cover proceedings here were kind of joking about it. Most of the time, we have plenty of room to spread out and plenty of room in the galleries and in the rows. Today, we have several overflow courtrooms going. The main courtroom was packed. So they consider the overflow courtrooms to be exactly like court. We have the same rules, same decorum, same everything. So I was in the overflow room, but I was able to, we have a camera that's purely focused on the judge, and then we have a camera that kind of tracks back and forth from the prosecution table as well as the defense table. Obviously, there's not a prosecution in this case, but the government has a table and the defense has a table, and other interested parties, including Mr. Trump's attorneys, sit behind Michael Cohen. So it's a little bit different than what folks usually associate with a courtroom, in that the desks are behind each other. So it's not kind of, you have two different sides. They're kind of one after the other.
And was there an audible reaction when the disclosure came out that Sean Hannity is his client?
It sounded like there was a little bit of an audible reaction. It sounded like there was a little bit of that kind of that, I don't want to say a gasp, but that kind of air out of the courtroom that we heard. Certainly in the overflow room, I think people were surprised, and there was a faint chuckle, and then the next noise was all of us reporters, our shoes kind of pounding the courtroom floor as we headed out of there and came down the 12 floors from where the overflow room is to come out here and speak to you.
All right, let me bring Eric Deggans in. Eric Deggans is a media critic with NPR, longtime media reporter, joining us from St. Petersburg. Eric, I need to ask you to put this into context for us. When you hear that Sean Hannity, that Michael Cohen had 3 clients in 2017 and 2018, one is the president, one is the now disgraced deputy fundraising chair, finance chair for the Republican National Committee, who had an affair with a Playboy playmate and who subsequently had an abortion of a pregnancy that was the product of their union, and now Sean Hannity. Just give us some context as a guy who covers media. Does it matter? Is it important? Is it relevant? Talk to me.
Well, I mean, as a media critic, what occurs to me is the idea of disclosure, full disclosure, and the sense that you want pundits to be honest brokers. Certainly, pundits can express opinions. Sean Hannity's been expressing his opinion for quite a long while, but you also want a sense that they have some independence from the situations that they're commenting on, and if they don't have that independence, that they at least disclose that to their viewers so that people know where they're coming from. Now, obviously, Sean Hannity has been a stalwart defender of President Trump for quite a while, and someone who has taken his side and and has been very supportive
right, so
of his
I'm going to interrupt you for a
administration.
second. In fairness, even to use the term pundit, I said journalist a few minutes ago, and I now can't go on Twitter. Even to use the word pundit with Sean Hannity, he's whether you like him or not, he's more than that now, right? He has been the biggest public advocate possibly for the president on mainstream television.
He is certainly one of the biggest, but he is also still technically a pundit. I mean, if you went to the executives at Fox News and asked them about their independence from the Trump administration, I dare say you'd get some pushback. And even though he is a supporter of the president, at the very least, viewers should know that he shares a lawyer with the president, so that people can judge what he's saying accurately and decide for themselves how independent he is and how independent his analyses are. And so that's, as a media critic, that's the one thing that troubles me, is that there's been no disclosure and people don't know when he's talking how close he actually is connected to Donald Trump.
Rebecca Ballhaus from the Wall Street Journal spoke to Sean Hannity briefly and got a response from him in which he said he is known, we've been friends a long time. I have sought legal advice from Michael. He was in the middle of his show, so he wasn't able to speak at greater length with Rebecca. But Rebecca, you say that he is, oh, here we go. Right as we're talking, we have got a response from Hannity. A lot of this is what you said he started to say. This was on Sean Hannity's radio show. He said, it is very, well, actually, I've got it. My producer's telling me we can actually play this. Let's play it.
Strange to watch my own television network having my name up as a lower third in terms of it being a story. There's a part of me that really wants to build this up into something massive and make the media go nuts. I had no idea all these media people like me so much, and now they have to listen to the program. Maybe I should play it off in the last hour or the last minute of TV tonight. But I think this is I actually think it's pretty funny. Anyway, so Michael Cohen, there's this big hearing today as it relates to his case. And part of what went on today was that Michael Cohen was asked by the judge in the case, Kimba Wood, it happens to be her name, about, you know, who your clients are, et cetera.
That's pretty much what you told us. He spoke to you, and then he went on air. He knew you were on the case, and probably a whole lot of journalists were now going to be following this. So that's his explanation. But you weren't able to get anything more as to why Sean Hannity, who's not short of money, would have chosen Michael Cohen as his lawyer.
That's right. And I think that's going to be the question for Sean Hannity, and the question that most reporters are going to be chasing is, why did Sean Hannity decide to hire Michael Cohen? Cohen, at least for these other two clients, President Trump and Elliot Broidy, has appeared to have something of a specialty in that he, for Trump, helped arrange a payment to Stormy Daniels. For Elliot Broidy, helped arrange a payment to a former Playboy model who said that he had impregnated her. So I think the question is, was he ever doing something like this for Sean Hannity, or was it a more regular legal matter? That's the question that's going to have to be answered.
So just the Elliot Broidy part, Danny, let's just remind people, because I think not a lot of people who don't follow politics all that closely would have known Elliot Broidy's name even a week ago. This guy is the deputy finance chair, or was the deputy finance chair, he's since resigned, for the Republican National Committee. And the reason Michael Cohen represented him was
to facilitate an agreement whereby it's similar to the Stormy Daniels. It was a story that was probably damaging to Mr. Broidy. You can hear me tiptoeing through this, but Michael Cohen negotiated an agreement with a female who allegedly had an abortion, I believe, and essentially paid her so the story would not come out.
And that was not the $130,000. That's a $1.6 million payment. So, you know, Sean Hannity, I guess, would have been happier if Michael Cohen did have 100 clients or even 10 clients or whatever number it is, who had a bunch of things that they were being represented for. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a flavor between Elliot Broidy and Donald Trump of the things that Michael Cohen has been representing them for, payoffs to keep people quiet.
Sean Hannity, and this is what's fascinating to me. This has been known all weekend because on Friday afternoon at the hearing, the issue came up when Cohen's attorneys could not articulate who exactly his clients were. So I have to imagine that over the weekend, Sean Hannity was thinking, they have to disclose these clients. This was in the news on Friday. Maybe I should give Michael Cohen a call. Maybe even that phone call, that picture that we saw of Michael Cohen holding his cell phone over the weekend, maybe that was Sean Hannity calling and saying, hey, Monday, are you going to say my name? And if so, maybe you should just fall on the sword of confidentiality and get cited for contempt and refuse to answer the question. The reality is legally, there really isn't a basis for Michael Cohen to refuse to disclose the identity of his client if commanded to do so by the court. But Sean Hannity had to be aware of this all weekend because this undisclosed client list, Sean Hannity knew he was on it. Right. So it raises the question, what communications did he have?
He may not have known, Katie Phang, that he was one of 3 people on the undisclosed client list, but there's no obligation on Sean Hannity to do anything. It does sound like, from the clip that we just heard from his radio show, it sounds like he's going to play coy with this one. He's going to somehow work it into his routine about how everybody, the media, very interesting to hear Sean Hannity referring to the media and, others in the media going nuts. Sounds like that's his play, at least for the moment.
Well, listen, Hannity sounds relatively nonplussed. He's doing a poker face to the extent we can see it because it's on a radio show. But from a legal perspective, no, Hannity doesn't have an obligation to pre-announce prior to the hearing today, because why let that proverbial cat out of the bag if Judge Kimba would never order the disclosure? If you are one of 3, this is what we can say with definitives, though, Allie. You know that the conversation happened between Sean Hannity and Michael Cohen. Why? Because Cohen's lawyers got up as officers of the court today and told Judge Kimba Wood the client does not want to be disclosed in association with this case. Sounds like they had a conversation.
Eric Deggans, does it matter? This would matter a lot more if the third client were a host here at MSNBC. It would matter a lot more if it were a host at CNN. Does it matter that it's Sean Hannity? There's nobody in America who doesn't believe that Sean Hannity is squarely in President Trump's corner. How much more does it matter to you that they share a lawyer?
Well, again, the idea is that you want to establish parameters for punditry. You want people to know all of the connections that the people have to the subjects that they're covering. And, what troubles me, to expand this just a little bit, what troubles me about where we are with pundits is that often they seem to want the authority and the credibility that comes with a connection to journalism, with looking like a journalist, but they don't necessarily want to follow all the ethical codes and guidelines that come with being a journalist. And so, I guess it would just be a signal to viewers to say, if you were inclined to consider what Sean Hannity is saying, just know that he had a connection to President Trump that hasn't been disclosed until now.
And this is an interesting point you made.
I just think it's good practice for pundits to be as honest as they can about situations like this, and so that the viewers are adequately informed.
Hey, is Gabe still on the line with me? Have I got Gabe Sherman?
I'm here.
Gabe, to this point that Eric makes, which is really interesting, there are certain benefits and advantages in one's professional life that come by being shrouded in the cloak of journalism. Is there a rule? Is there something about being a pundit? Or is a guy like Sean Hannity, certainly in the last 18 months, given his tight relationship with President Trump, his remarkably favorable interviews, the degree to which they talk, the advice that is sought from Sean Hannity by Donald Trump, the fact that Donald Trump tweets about Sean Hannity. Does he have any rules he has to follow? And will this make any difference to Fox News viewers or, more importantly, advertisers?
Well, the short answer, Ali, is no. I mean, clearly Sean Hannity has demonstrated that he does not believe any of the conventions that have separated journalists and or commentators from the subjects they cover. We should point out that Donald Trump, Hannity lent his private jet during the campaign to fly, I believe it was Newt Gingrich, to interview for Donald Trump's running mate during the presidential campaign. So he was using his personal resources to actually help the campaign of Donald Trump. you know, to the question of advertisers and Fox News, I mean, I think this only becomes an issue for Hannity if his corporate overlords, including Rupert Murdoch, feel that this somehow damages the brand of Fox, and in that way they would intervene. But in terms of the way Sean Hannity conducts his programs, no, this doesn't violate any rules because he doesn't have any.
Well, you know these guys better than most of us, Gabe. Do you think they're going to think this damages the brand?
I actually just think they may, because, you know, this network has been getting, you know, blasted for the last year plus for being state television, Donald Trump's media outlet, Trump TV, all of the above. And there are people at Fox like Shepard Smith and Chris Wallace who, from my own reporting, have been agitating internally very aggressively and loudly that they don't like the stench and stigma that comes from being branded as Trump TV. And they could use an episode like this to their internal political advantage and really say this is bad for all of us. It makes all of our jobs harder. And, you know, they can point to the fact that advertisers have been boycotting Laura Ingram's programs. So financially, these kind of right-wing opinion programs, while they do bring in viewers, they're not something that necessarily advertisers want to be associated with. So I think if this creates enough internal dissent at Fox, then Rupert Murdoch may be swayed to clamp down on Hannity.
I want to go back to Tom Witter outside federal court. Tom has filed the story that Sean Hannity has been disclosed as the third of 3 clients that Michael Cohen represented in 2017 and this year, 2018. The disclosure was made after a federal judge, Kimba Wood, challenged Cohen's attorneys to cite what legal reason they had for refusing to hand over the name of Hannity or to file it under seal. These are the 3 clients. Elliot Broidy, the middle one, paid out $1.6 million to a woman who alleged they had a relationship which resulted in a pregnancy, which she aborted. Tom, the other name that came up in court today was that of Donald Trump. In what context?
That's exactly right. And his name was brought up by federal prosecutors, Todd McKay, who's an assistant United States attorney. He was basically talking about in Cohen's filing this morning to the court. He talked about how this investigation had become politicized. He talked that that people were discussing whether or not this investigation was appropriate. And he said both Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump have made inflammatory remarks about this case. He accused them of drumming up the media attention. So when he talked about fairness, he said that it was really on Cohen and Trump who had been talking about this case and drumming up attention about it, and that's the reason why this issue of fairness is a question at all. And that came right from the mouth of the assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York here. And in addition to that, he talked about fairness. You know, he said to Judge Kimba Wood, he said, would it be fair in this case to appoint some sort of a special master or any sort of other solution at how to handle these materials and documents that were uncovered in the search warrant, other than to go through the normal procedure, which is to have a privilege team, or as they call it, a fairness team, or perhaps some folks call it a taint team, but basically to have this additional team. So it's interesting that the first substantial mention of President Trump came out of the words of out of the mouth, rather, of a federal prosecutor. And I'll repeat what I said, that he mentioned that it was inflammatory remarks from the president and from Michael Cohen himself. So I thought that was interesting. We've obviously been spending a lot of time on the Sean Hannity disclosure, but certainly the president and his interests are well in play here in the courtroom behind me. Proceedings still going on. So at this point, we don't know whether the judge is going to rule today, whether or not the judge is going to rule from the bench. I highly doubt that would be the case. I expect a written order here when that comes, whether it's later tonight, tomorrow, or another day. We'll soon find out. But the proceeding, again, still going on behind me. And Mr. Trump's name well mentioned, and obviously his attorneys are in court.
All right. And Michael Avenatti's in court, and Stephanie Clifford, Stormy Daniels is in court. Lots of stuff going on behind Tom Witter. I want to bring Charlie Sykes in. He's an MSNBC contributor and a conservative radio host. Charlie, what do you make of this?
Well, Lordy, I hope there are tapes. I mean, how extraordinary. How extraordinary is this? Look, Sean Hannity had no legal obligation to disclose his relationship with Michael Cohen. But if there is anything remaining of journalistic ethics over at Fox News, he certainly needed to disclose that fact when he was going on and on and on, talking about Michael Cohen, the raid on Michael Cohen, and this entire legal proceeding here. And I guess in your previous discussion, the question is, are there any standards any longer? we've talked a lot about being in a post-factual political world. You kind of wonder whether over there you're in a post-ethical political world as well.
Because Eric Deggans makes a point that there are rules for people like me who are journalists, and there should be rules, or at least there should be some accepted standards for people who are pundits. And you are one, but Sean Hannity walks a slightly different rope. He's on. He may be on the other side of even those standards that apply to normal pundits, but I guess a lot of people are these days, Charlie.
Well, that's true, and this is one of the ways in which we've changed our understanding of what is normal in the last several years. Not only how pundits like Sean Hannity have really become an integral part of Trump world, but in ways in which they've also seemed to absorb the style and the standards and the morality of that world as well, which is what makes this so fascinating. Now, in answer to the question, which you didn't ask me yet, which was, how will Fox react? I think, they want to get the answer to the question we all want to get, which is, what was Michael Cohen doing for Sean Hannity? And the answer to that question, I think, is going to be dispositive.
Yep. I want to bring Claire Atkinson into this, but Claire, I want to we don't have this cut immediately. We're going to have it in a moment. But Hannity last week was talking about the raid on Michael Cohen. He said, all right, living up to its anti-Trump reputation, the liberal mainstream media, they've gone totally off the rails over the FBI's highly questionable raid on Michael Cohen and, of course, President Trump's harsh criticism of Robert Mueller witch hunt. Watch this. Okay, so that's what he said. We'll play that for you in a minute. Now I want to play to you what Sean Hannity said this hour on his radio show when news of this first broke. He was on the radio when it happened. Let's listen.
Strange to watch my own television network having my name up as a lower third in terms of it being a story. There's a part of me that really wants to build this up into something massive and make the media go nuts. I had no idea all these media people like me so much, and now they have to listen to the program. Maybe I should play it off in the last hour or the last minute of TV tonight. But I think this is I actually think it's pretty funny. Anyway, so Michael Cohen, there's this big hearing today as it relates to his case. And part of what went on today was that Michael Cohen was asked by the judge in the case, Kimba Wood, it happens to be her name, about, who your clients are, et cetera.
And it turns out that this Michael Cohen only had 3 clients in 2017, 2018. And one of them is Sean Hannity. Now, Hannity's smart. People are going to tune into his show. People are going to watch him because they're going to want to know what he has to say about this. The question everybody has right now is, I don't think anybody cares who anybody's lawyer is. It's, why did you have this guy who's more known as a fixer who makes problems go away? We're learning increasingly by paying people off. That's a question people are going to have for Sean Hannity.
Absolutely. I mean, some people might be wondering, was he simply using this lawyer to be in the power circle to know what Trump's thinking about? I'm surprised to hear Sean say that he thinks it's funny. As we've seen with other shows on Fox News, when the advertisers get involved, your show can come off air and you can be sitting on the sidelines. This show is immensely important to Fox News. It's one of the highest rated on all TV news networks. It brings in a huge amount of ad revenue. And as we saw with Laura Ingraham, when she said things the viewers didn't like, and, we're finding out things that we might not like about Sean Hannity and this relationship with Michael Cohen, that you can be penalized by advertisers, and that can cause big problems. The one thing we're waiting to hear right now is whether Fox News' bosses at 21st Century Fox feel like there ought to have been a disclosure. He is reporting on the president every night. Sharing the same lawyer does represent an issue, especially when you're defending Michael Cohen. He should have said that he had a relationship with him, and he didn't. And so that's a question for his bosses at 21st Century Fox.
That's one question they've got to answer. The other question is going to be whether or not this has any impact on the ongoing investigation, or on whether people watch Fox News, or whether people think that there's something more going on in this investigation with the president. Joining me by phone is Jennifer Rubin. She writes the Right Turn blog for the Washington Post. She's a conservative columnist. Jennifer, your thoughts upon hearing this?
I have 2 thoughts. One is that Sean Hannity has, in essence, been lying to his viewers. When he reports and he gives his opinion, he is a pundit, he is not supposed to be reporting on things that have a personal, pecuniary or legal impact on his life. It would be as if you were in your old role reporting on stocks that you had you stood to benefit from. No news organization allows that to happen. And if I, for example, didn't disclose that, say, I had some pending matter before a regulatory agency I was opining about, I would be fired. So I think Fox has to decide once and for all if they're a real news organization or they're not. I tend to think at this point they're not. But I also think what's significant here is that for Fox News, which, remember, made a whole to-do about a whole new climate, a whole new attitude towards women, what was it that he was doing for Sean Hannity? Was he paying off a woman for harassment in the workplace? If so, that doesn't seem to be in step with Fox's promise to its shareholders, to its viewers, that it was going to clean up his act. So I think it behooves Mr. Hannity to tell his employer and tell the country what was involved. And if Fox really is serious about turning over a new leaf, or they're just it's back to square one, just like we did in the bad old Bill O'Reilly days.
Well, he started to talk. There's a little more that we've got now from the radio show that he just said. I want to bring Katie Phang and Danny Cevallos into this. He said, Michael never represented me in any matter. I have never retained him in the traditional sense of retaining a lawyer. I never received an invoice from Michael. I never paid legal fees to Michael. Now, Katie, it would occur to me, I don't know how it works with lawyers and clients. If he says this, he still counts as a client. Michael Cohen couldn't deny that he was a client in saying that he's never invoiced him and that he's never received fees from Sean Hannity. So explain that to me a little bit.
So the short of it is the lack of an invoice in and of itself doesn't create the attorney-client, doesn't negate an attorney-client relationship. So in Sean Hannity's mind, perhaps he didn't really have that relationship, but clearly in Michael Cohen's mind, he thought that Sean Hannity was a client. The absence of an invoice, the absence of an official engagement agreement, that's a little bit more troubling. The rules of professional conduct in each state require that you should have an official engagement agreement evidencing the scope of the retention. The fact that there was never an official retention kind of is belied by the fact that Sean Hannity has now said that he did consult with or sought legal advice. So, you know, the absence, again, of official documentation does not negate the existence of a relationship.
Danny, we got a minute. I want to read the rest of that sentence. It says, but I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions about which I wanted his input and perspective, and I assume these conversations were attorney-client confidential.
This is the classic hypothetical that we get in law school on our ethics exam. You're at a cocktail party, you're chatting with someone, it's just you and the individual, and they ask you about some very serious legal advice. And does the attorney-client privilege arise from this conversation without a fee agreement, without an invoice, without billing the person? And the answer is yes, it definitely can. If all the other requirements for the privilege are there, in other words, there's no third party presence, and there was actually a request for legal services or advice. So, yes, this can absolutely
And legal
happen.
advice does constitute that. Legal advice falls into that category.
Yes, a request for or the receipt of legal advice or services will give rise to the attorney-client privilege, assuming the other requirements are there.
All right, thanks for being with me, and thanks to everybody who has helped me out through this hour. This is going to wrap it up for me, but I want to thank Tom Winter at the courthouse, Gabe Sherman, Rebecca Ballhaus from the Wall Street Journal, Jennifer Rubin, Katie Phang, Eric Deggans, Charlie Sykes, Danny Cevallos, Claire Atkinson. Well, this story will continue. Our coverage of it will continue. Deadline White House with Nicole Wallace starts right now.
Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York, where a dramatic day in court for Donald Trump and his personal attorney, Michael Cohen, is still unfolding. Cohen, the president's longtime fixer, came face-to-face with porn star Stormy Daniels, who he once paid $130,000 in hush money, allegedly on behalf of the president. At issue in today's hearings, lawyers for Trump and Cohen arguing that the documents and other items seized in last Monday's raid of Cohen's home and offices, which the president described as is an attack on our country, should be protected under attorney-client privilege. But we learned this morning the attorney in question, Cohen, only has 3 clients: the president, a top Republican fundraiser and subject of his own hush money incident, and an unnamed client Cohen tried to keep secret. But late this afternoon, we learned that client's identity: Fox News star and Trump confidant Sean Hannity. Although it's unclear what Cohen did to help him, and in a statement to the Wall Street Journal in just the last hour, Hannity simply explained, quote, "We've been friends a long time. I have sought legal advice from Michael. With us to make sense of how the president's fixer's fate is now inextricably linked to his own and how today's developments affect the case, we're joined by some of our favorite guests. Outside the New York courthouse, NBC's Tom Winter, NBC's Kristen Welker following developments from the White House, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department, Matt Miller's here, and Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney. Both Matt and Joyce, MSNBC analysts. Now, Tom Winter, let's start with you and those dramatic twists and turns, which I heard from 2 friends at Fox News, shocked them there in their workplace. But Sean Hannity now playing a role in this Cohen legal drama.
So, Nicole, this all came up because earlier today, Michael Cohen, in a legal filing through his attorneys, said that he's represented 3 clients rather, in the past 2 years. President Trump, of course, because that's his personal attorney. The second attorney would be Elliot Brody, and then a third person who didn't want his name to be revealed. In court proceedings, a judge essentially ordered Cohen's attorneys to disclose the name after arguments from United States attorneys, after arguments for a media lawyer, just arguing that any name that should be mentioned in the court should come out publicly, and that name is, as you have said, Sean Hannity, Fox News host. So basically what they're saying is that at some point in the last 2 years, Hannity was engaged with Michael Cohen in a way that attorney-client privilege might be invoked or might be sought in this case. So that's what we know as far as the development of who Michael Cohen is represented. As far as the overall hearing, which we believe is still underway, and as of 4 o'clock here, the doors are now shut, meaning we can't go back in. But Judge Kimballwood is continuing to hear arguments as to whether or not Michael Cohen has the opportunity to review all the documents that were seized in this search warrant, whether or not a kind of a referee, if you will, who's going to be an arbiter here, will have an opportunity to look at all the documents and decide what an investigative team has access to with the United States Attorney's Office, or whether a separate team working for the United States Attorney's Office will be able to look at all the documents and items recovered from Michael Cohen, and then will be able to hand over items that don't have to do with attorney-client privilege in order for them to continue their investigation. So that's what's being heard back and forth. One thing I do want to mention is that President Trump's name has come up directly in court and was brought up by a federal prosecutor. They were talking about this notion in Michael Cohen's letter this morning to the court, where he said, hey, this is a highly publicized case. There's all sorts of political back and forth. There's questions about whether or not this investigation is independent or not. And federal prosecutors took exception to that. They said that Mr. Cohen and Mr. Trump have used inflammatory language to be able to talk about this case. And they said that language drummed up some of the media coverage that's been going on over the past several days, or frankly the last week since the search warrant was effected here in New York. So that's what's going on behind me. Again, the hearing continues. We don't know if we're going to get a ruling today as far as what's going to happen, if this temporary restraining order is going to be granted, if there's going to be any sort of special measures that are taken into account. So obviously a lot still to be decided today, and we may not even get an answer today, Nicole. This may be a written order that we get from the judge either late tonight, tomorrow, or in the days ahead. So a lot still to come, a lot to develop, but obviously a lot of information coming out of today's hearing so far.
Kristen Welker, I talked to a source who said he didn't know if Donald Trump was aware of Michael Cohen's representation of Sean Hannity, but he confirmed that Sean Hannity is in constant daily contact with the president. And I went back and looked at Sean Hannity's reaction on the air Monday night, the night of the raid of Cohen's offices, which the president described in that building behind you as an attack. Actually, we have that. Let's watch.
The FBI has raided the office, the home, and the hotel room of Michael Cohen. the personal attorney of the President of the United States. Robert Mueller is so far beyond his mandate. This is now spiraling out of control. Everything that we have warned you about is now coming to fruition. And Mueller has ostensibly tonight declared war against the President of the United States. Clearly, his objective is to remove him from office. Now, I told you, and I've told anyone who will listen, Mueller's team is corrupt, starting with him, and it has been from the beginning.
I might have to play that a couple more times because the whole thing is a laughable joke in the context of knowing now that part of what was unearthed in Monday's raid of Cohen's offices could be documents pertaining to the legal relationship that Michael Cohen sought to keep secret this afternoon in a Manhattan courthouse about representing Sean Hannity in some capacity.
Well, right. A couple of points you raised that I think are significant, Nicole. First of all, the fact that you have Sean Hannity, the president and his allies, now making the case that that raid that happened last week and these court proceedings today are all a part of the fact that we are witnessing the special counsel investigation cross a red line. So privately, it's meant that the president has been increasingly infuriated at Mueller, at Rod Rosenstein, and then publicly you see his allies attacking them more forcefully. Now, I am told, by the way, talk of potentially firing Mueller, firing Rosenstein has abated a bit, particularly in the wake of the Syria strikes, the president sort of shifting his attention to that crisis for now. To the other point that you bring up, though, this revelation that Michael Cohen has represented Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity just speaking out about this moments ago, Nicole, on his radio show. Let me read you what he has to say. He says, I've known Michael a long time, and let me be very clear to the media. Michael never represented me in any manner. I never retained him in a traditional sense, but I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions. And he goes on to say that there was never a third party involved in this. So again, he's trying to make the case that this was him seeking legal advice from Michael Cohen. Nonetheless, it sort of underscores the fact that there are links between all of these men. And as you rightfully say, Nicole, Sean Hannity is someone who the president speaks with, who the president meets with at Mar-a-Lago, at times has met with at the White House as well. And so it provides this growing picture of sort of who's in the president's inner circle. And when you talk about an inner circle, it doesn't get much closer than Michael Cohen. He's the president's fixer. He's seen as his family, and that's why the president is so infuriated by all of these developments. That is why they are arguing in court today. They want to have the ability, the president's team, to see these documents before they become a part of this legal case. We'll have to see what the judge decides. As Tom points out, we might not have an answer today, Nicole.
Kristen Welker, I know you're covering a lot of different stories for a lot of us here in New York. If you have anything else that develops on the Donald Trump-Sean Hannity relationship or on anything, any reaction there from the White House folks to what's happening, still unfolding in that courthouse in Manhattan, run back to that spot and we'll take it at any point in the next 55 minutes. Let me get to you, Joyce Vance, though. On the question of Sean Hannity, not only being the president's tip of the spear in terms of being his messenger for the maligning, the character assassination of men like Bob Mueller and Jim Comey, the men and women who carried out the raid on Cohen's office had to reach an incredibly high bar to be able to raid and seize documents from the president's personal attorney's office. Does that look different in hindsight, knowing that Sean Hannity was one of Michael Cohen's clients?
It doesn't look different to me at all, Nicole. The search warrant says that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office provided probable cause to believe that Cohen was involved in election campaign finance violations, was involved in either bank or wire fraud, and they were searching for evidence and for documents and for electronic information that would be relevant to that inquiry. So the fact that they've come across a client's information in a lawyer's office is not unusual. That's a situation that the taint team procedure that DOJ uses all the time in these sort of cases is well equipped to handle. And what would have normally happened had the president and had Cohen's lawyers not objected to this process is that the Taint team would have seen that there were files related to a third client who presumably is not part of the investigation. They would have shut those files and put them aside, and they would have never gone on to the investigative team. The irony is that Hannity's name only surfaces here because of the motion, the very unusual motion filed by Cohen.
To keep the documents, to be able to go through them before they're turned over to the investigators. And the argument they made was that this culture, the argument they made, I think I have a line from that. They in a filing today basically asserted that there's a culture or climate, I think was the word they used, that was politically biased. It turns out the bias is on the other side. The man running the let's malign the rule of law, let's malign the Justice Department, let's malign the FBI, was one of the clients who sought to have his legal records protected.
Yeah, it's really pretty extraordinary. The president's argument is, I'm above the law. Even though there's no legal authority for doing things differently in a case involving me, you have to, essentially because I've been maligning the Justice Department.
Matt Miller, let me bring you in on this. You've got the keenest eye on what has really been some of the most startling developments of the Trump era, sort of the constant war on the Justice Department, the constant character assassination against Donald Trump's own appointees at the Justice Department and the FBI. It was a war waged largely night after night after night by Sean Hannity in the primetime hours on Fox News. What do you make of today's finding that he is one of Michael Cohen's clients and one of the people Michael Cohen sought to protect in terms of keeping those records under seal?
I think what it shows is that they have an alignment not just of common interests, where Sean Hannity is speaking out on President Trump's behalf, but they obviously have a business relationship. Sean Hannity, now we know, was a client of Michael Cohen's. He said in that statement you played earlier that he was just seeking legal advice. He wasn't representing any kind of matter involving a third party. It's hard to understand what that legal advice is. Michael Cohen's not an august lawyer like a Ted Olson or a Joyce Vance. I mean, he's a fixer that you use to pay off porn stars or to pay off Playboy playmates with hush money. And so I think for Sean Hannity, he's going to have to answer questions about what kind of legal advice that is, and he's going to have to answer questions about why he didn't disclose that relationship when he was railing against the Justice Department last week, railing against this raid, and whether he was actually worried about some kind of information that would involve the matter for which Michael Cohen represented him that might become public or might become known to the Justice Department. We don't have any reason yet to believe that it's that relationship that the Department of Justice is investigating. They seem to be investigating Michael Cohen's work for Donald Trump, maybe his work for others, maybe his own individual legal problems. But it raises serious questions. I say it raises serious questions about Sean Hannity's, how his objectivity. I don't think those are real questions or have been for some time. But it raises serious questions about Fox News and whether they will be happy with him.
Let me press you, not his objectivity, but about his motive. I mean, we have all sort of accepted, and there is a bit of sort of putting Sean Hannity on the couch that goes like this, that part of avenging Roger Ailes' death is defending Donald Trump in a way that they couldn't defend a man who was a father-like figure. And I can't wait to talk to Gabe Sherman about that. He's going to join us in a second. But there is something about the zeal with which they defend Donald Trump. So it may not be a lack of objectivity, but it may be an additional motive to just ideological agreement with everything in the Trump agenda.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And not just an ideological motive, but the fact that, look, these are people who all share, all work in one kind of very small, set of shared relationships. And now we find business relationships with the same attorney. And what I was going to the point I was going to try to make is it's not that you don't really question, we're not going to get into Sean Hannity's objectivity, but it raises real questions for Fox News, whether they knew about this, whether he disclosed it to them, and whether they are okay with him continuing to rail against this investigation when we now know he has a very personal interest in it. It goes beyond just him and goes to, I think, the entire network.
All right, everyone is staying put. I want to play you Sean Hannity responding on his radio show just after this news broke a little over an hour ago. Let's listen and talk to Gabe on the other side.
Michael never represented me in any matter. I never retained him in the traditional sense as retaining a lawyer. I never received an invoice from Michael. I never paid legal fees to Michael. But I have occasionally had brief discussions with him about legal questions about which I wanted his input. and perspective. And I assume that those conversations were attorney-client confidential. And the other thing I will need to point out to the media that is apparently going insane over this, not one of any issue I ever dealt with Michael Cohen on ever involved a matter between me and any third party.
Joining us by phone right now is Gabe Sherman, special correspondent for Vanity Fair and an MSNBC contributor. He's written about Fox News for many years. Gabe, you and I have had many conversations about the relationship between some of the most prominent figures on air and off at Fox News and the Republicans they cover and in many instances bolster. There is no one more integral to the Trump defense than Sean Hannity.
Yeah, that's right, Nicole. I mean, you can't really draw a line between where the Trump administration ends and Sean Hannity's radio and nightly Fox program begins. I mean, he has been so intertwined really from the beginning of the campaign. And, you know, for Sean Hannity, this is Donald Trump's ascendancy really represents something of a second chance for Hannity, because for years, Hannity really graded at Fox of being the second fiddle to Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly was the 800-pound gorilla, the big star. And when O'Reilly was forced out of the network last year amid sexual harassment allegations, Hannity emerged as the unchallenged true star of the network, and his close alliance with Donald Trump made his ratings bigger than ever. And this has been something of an ego inflator for Sean Hannity, where finally, late in his career, he gets to be the biggest star in right-wing media. I would say probably bigger than Rush Limbaugh at this point. And, you know, Hannity is famous for telling friends, he says he doesn't do this for the money anymore, and that's probably true. He's fantastically rich. He's doing this because he, in his wildest dreams, probably could never imagine being as influential as he is.
Gabe, let me ask you a question, though, about what goes on inside Fox News. There is not comfort in all corners of Fox News with the line that Sean Hannity takes, the absolutism that he takes in defending everything Donald Trump does. And with this development today, I looked back at some of the diehard conservative supporters of Donald Trump's, people like Ann Coulter and Laura Ingraham, who didn't hesitate to take their shots at Donald Trump when he seemed to backpedal from a campaign promise like the wall. Not so with Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity has Donald Trump's back in a way that totally transcends policy. Does today's development give us a clue into why that might be?
Without question. I mean, obviously, it raises the question of what financial relationships exist between them. Now, Hannity said he didn't pay Michael Cohen. While that may be true, there may be other ways he may have paid a company, a consulting company that Cohen set up. We just don't know the full extent of their relationships. What I have heard from inside Fox News from my sources, and this is a fast-moving story, so it will continue to develop, but what I have heard thus far is that Hannity retained Cohen last year when left-wing groups were calling for Hannity's ouster from the network around his coverage of the Seth Rich conspiracy story. And sources inside Fox told me that Hannity grew, quote, paranoid that there was an orchestrated George Soros-led campaign to get him off the air. And he retained lawyers, I believe others in addition to Cohen, and perhaps hired private investigators to look into his enemies who were trying to do these boycotts to get him off the air. So I believe, and I have not 100% confirmed this because this is fast-moving and more sources are coming forward, but what I have learned thus far is that Cohen, that Hannity consulted Cohen on how to stop and perhaps fight back against left-wing attacks that were trying to boycott his advertisers.
Gabe, are you reporting then that your initial belief is that Michael Cohen was retained to help Sean Hannity fight back when the going got tough inside Fox News, and that you're reporting at this hour is that it wasn't the kind of relationship Michael Cohen had with the president's prolific donor, Mr. Brody, or with the president himself, where Cohen was involved in hush money payments to porn stars? Is that your understanding?
That's correct. I have not heard any echoes of it being any kind of sexual relationship that Hannity was seeking to silence. My knowledge thus far, and again, it's fast moving, so it could evolve. But what I've heard thus far is that it was he hired Cohen as a fixer to try to stop political attacks and perhaps damage and go after his enemies. Now, it's oftentimes lawyers like Michael Cohen will hire private investigators to look into people that are perceived enemies. And when Hannity mentioned on his radio show that there was no third party involved, I don't know if he was referring to the fact that there was no third party, meaning like a woman in the case of Stormy Daniels, or no third party, meaning a private investigator. But my suspicion, based on the reporting I've done, is that Michael Cohen is exactly the kind of person you would go to find a private investigator to try to look into, say, Media Matters or any other left-wing group that was calling for a boycott.
Okay, Gabe Sherman, this is weird, but I got to do this. Sean Hannity is watching. We've added a viewer, and he says that what Gabe said is a lie. You can say that's 1,000% true. I never asked Michael about left-wing attacks versus me. So I trust your sources are superb. Let me just add one more, Mr. Sean Hannity, to your body of reporting. I cannot wait to read the story, but I wanted you to be on the air to respond to that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting response. I mean, Hannity has flatly denied things in the past that I have had multiple sources on and known to be true. So I think Hannity, like many others in the Trump orbit, have sort of questionable credibility when it comes to denying things that are later proven to be true. But that said, I did preface this by saying it's a fast-moving story. This was what people inside Fox News were talking about in relation to Hannity's relationship with Cohen. And if Hannity is saying that is not the case, he's more than welcome to correct the record and tell the world.
You know what
exactly
I'm going to do? I'm going to put you two on a text, let you work this out. We had your reporting, which is always superb. We had Sean's response, and I know you've done an extraordinary, in a league of your own, body of reporting on Fox News. So we're all going to be watching you cover this story. I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to Sean's real-time response to our coverage of this. Gabe, thank you so much. Jump back on the phone, though, if you learn anything else. We always want to hear it. Joining me at the table, Carol Lee, NBC News national political reporter, Bret Stephens, New York Times op-ed columnist, who's always here for the weirdest of days, and an MSNBC contributor, John Podhoretz, who's been here for plenty of weird days himself, Commentary magazine editor, also an MSNBC contributor, and Mark McKinnon, my brother in weirdness, creator, executive producer, and co-host of The Circus, and in Washington, former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards, now a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. John, you go while I check my phone to see if there's anything else from Mr. Hannity. We are very happy to have you as a viewer, Sean. Keep watching. Go.
So I'm not sure that this is anything but a sideshow and a sort of a distraction from the centerpiece.
Come on, they went to court to protect I mean, the whole hearing today was about Michael Cohen making an argument that the climate is biased against him and Mr. Trump, and so they wouldn't have to reveal these names. The only name that we didn't know was Sean Hannity.
Right, but when I say a sideshow, I mean Cohen is just trying to blow whatever smoke he possibly can. Sean is saying that he basically was hardly a client of Cohen, so one or the other thing has to be true. Either Sean is not telling the truth and he and Cohen are deeply wrapped up together in some legal matter that Cohen had to hide or sought to hide under the terms of attorney-client privilege, or Cohen is engaged in some weird effort to kind of spin a story in some strange way, and he's added Hannity to his client list, but he isn't really a client, and I don't understand any of these people, and I don't know how much longer we can go on before we're all institutionalized.
Oh, come on, you're listening to face. Go ahead, Bret.
This gets at something, and I hate to cite him approvingly, but something that Jim Comey said in his book, that this operates like a mafia family. You've got the Don, you've got his fixer, you've got the circle of trusted acquaintances, and all of them sort of have these interlocking relationships. And you know, one of the things that comes out of this for me is the extent to which it's almost a misnomer to describe Michael Cohen as a lawyer.
Correct.
He is a
poor
fixer.
Man's Ray Donovan.
Right. I mean, I just checked his law school. He went to a fourth-tier law school. It's not the sort of guy you go to if you're very rich for first-class legal advice. So what do you do with a fixer? What do fixers do? They fix stuff, right? We know the sort of things that Michael Cohen was fixing for Donald Trump. It would be interesting to know the sort of things that he was fixing, if any, for Sean Hannity.
Yeah, I mean, every time there's a development like this, I feel like it just raises more questions than answers. And the questions are, what was the service that was provided? Why did he not want his name to be disclosed? Because he says in the court that he didn't want this to come out.
Let me read that.
What did Fox News know? Did this have to be disclosed internally? What did the president know? And was there any relation to the president knowing that and the defense that Sean Hannity has delivered on behalf of the president?
And I think this hangs together for two reasons. One, Cohen did a lot of seedy stuff. I mean, before the Hannity news broke, we were gonna bring our viewers up to date on some of the Cohen headlines. Cohen, the president's fixer, is in the Wall Street Journal today, where the Wall Street Journal reports that in 2013 he killed a story in Us Weekly, which, by the way, I called U.S. Weekly, which is another reason why I got fired from The View. They were preparing to report about an alleged affair between Donald Trump Jr., who'd been a judge a year earlier on the television show Celebrity Apprentice, and one of the contestants. So, to Brett's point, Cohen really wasn't operating as a lawyer in Trump's orbit. He was operating as a fixer. So the addition of Sean Hannity's name, who, again, I don't know if anyone, I'm sure none of our viewers watch as much Fox News as I do, but I watch it to understand the other side and where they're going and how far they've gone. And to describe Sean Hannity as having gone the farthest from reality would not be an understatement. His constant attacks on the DOJ and the FBI, which are now run by men handpicked by Donald Trump. By the way, the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney's Office also run by, I think, one of two U.S. attorneys Donald Trump interviewed personally in the Oval Office. I mean, it is an interesting piece of the picture being filled in today.
Yeah, this is Infrastructure Week, right?
Yeah, again.
Hi, Sean. I don't think it's a surprise that Sean Hannity is talking to the president's lawyer. There's a close relationship there with the president. That doesn't surprise me. There's two things here, though.
You're not surprised that he's a client of the president's, again, not his lawyer, his fixer.
I'm not surprised that he's talking to Donald Trump's lawyer. No. Two things, though. I think that he should clear the air and tell us what he was talking to him about. If it was just a casual relationship, he wasn't paying for anything, then it must have not been that important. So what was he talking to him about? If it wasn't the media boycott, what was it? Two, the thing that really disturbs me, and I think probably disturbs any journalists, is that the clip that you showed earlier. He's reporting on the raid on the office with great outrage without disclosing that he's his attorney as well.
Right.
That's where I have the problem. So this is about disclosure and transparency, and so we should have known before that reporting happened on that case. And then, as you said, maybe there's a motive there. Maybe there's, on all of that comes together, that maybe Hannity saw this leading toward Trump's lawyer.
Let me bring Joyce back in, though, on this legal question, because I think you raised a good question. What would the bar have been for the raid to include all of Cohen's clients? I mean, we learned some new dates today. So on August 2nd of last year, Bob Mueller got permission from Rod Rosenstein to widen the scope. That happens to be the same date on which the search warrant was executed. What kind of information about what kinds of figures doing what kinds of crimes would have justified both those events? The widening of the Mueller probe and an extraordinary search warrant.
So there are two sorts of things the government has to do when they get a search warrant. The first is they have to meet this standard of proof called probable cause. They have to convince a federal judge, and in this case, some pretty high-up people in the Justice Department, including Rod Rosenstein, that there is sufficient evidence to support the inference that there would be proof and perhaps fruits of crime that they would acquire during the search, not just of Cohen's business, but also of his home and the hotel room he was staying in. That's a pretty hefty bar. And then they had to have some substantive allegations. They had to provide an affidavit based on evidence that the agents had put together that convinced the judge that they were legitimately looking into violations of campaign finance law, of bank fraud, and of wire fraud laws. So the substance has to match up with this high procedural bar. And it tells you that they weren't just speculating, they weren't ruminating about what might be happening. They were going after specific allegations of crimes that they believed Cohen had committed.
All right, so a source close to the White House today told me that the president's anxiety about the Cohen raid likely falls into three distinct categories. One, things he knows Mr. Cohen did for him that he doesn't want people, including his wife, to find out about. Two, things the president doesn't necessarily remember Cohen doing for him, but that he worries won't look so so great. And 3, thinks he may not have ever known Cohen had handled on his behalf. And, you know, Carol, as we've been talking about, those concerns make sense the more we learn about Michael Cohen.
Yes, and they certainly do. But it's the latter, the middle part that you talked about, where he may or not remember or isn't really sure, that gets to the heart of why some of the president's legal advisors think he should never sit down and talk to Robert Mueller. When it comes to Sean Hannity, you know, I think that part of why everyone has such curiosity around this is because of the company he's in. And I don't mean the people. I mean, he's one of 3 people who used Michael Cohen's services to have payments, whether it's Elliot Brody, who with $1.6 million to a woman who said that he impregnated her, or Stormy Daniels. And so then it
now
leaves
Sean says to me directly that there was no third party involved. Right. So whatever it was, he's saying.
But clearly, I guess the point is Michael Cohen isn't doing this because, you know, he lost his teddy bear or something like that. Right. It's not. That's not the space in which he's operating.
It's not his line of work. He makes dirty things go away.
Okay, so there are 2 things here. One is it's not illegal to have Michael Cohen as your lawyer. We should stipulate that Michael Cohen is not some font of illegality, and if you have any connection to him, you should therefore be considered a criminal and go to jail. The second thing is that the relationship of Sean Hannity to the truth and at Fox News, and whether Fox News cares that he had a wild conflict of interest because his lawyer was somebody he was doing programs about, that is an issue that Fox News is going to have to deal with. It still doesn't come to the level of what is the public policy implication of this. There's only a public policy implication if there is some connection between Hannity, Cohen, and Trump. If Hannity and Cohen have something going on, I'm not sure it's any of our business what it is, just because Michael Cohen finds himself in the middle of a legal jeopardy situation. But the Fox thing, that's going to be interesting and telling. They may do nothing. I mean, they let Sean do some pretty bad stuff.
But he probably wasn't working on Sean's will, I would guess.
Well, you never know. Matt Miller, let me get you back in on this part of the conversation and ask you this broader question about, you know, Fox News doesn't do a lot of soul searching, but they did after the sexual misconduct scandals. They did apologize for some of the substance of Sean Hannity's coverage around the Seth Rich issue. I'm sorry, yeah, around the death of Seth Rich. What do you think? I mean, Sean Hannity seems to sort of function. I know Gabe Sherman described it this way: in a world with no rules, even inside Fox News, they describe it as the inmates running the asylum, the people who have to live by the rules, as opposed to people like Sean who do not. Do you think there's any incentive for anything to change over there?
I think there's only one incentive, and that'll be the one that's always mattered at Fox News, and it's that money talks. And each of those incidents you talked about, where they backed down and eventually forced O'Reilly out when they apologized for the Seth Rich incident, it's because there was mass outrage from the public that led to boycotts and led to advertisers pulling their programming, first from Bill O'Reilly and later from Hannity. That's what led to them pushing O'Reilly out the door and forcing Hannity to apologize and the network apologizing itself. Absent any kind of public pressure, I don't think we're likely to see anything from Fox. And so I think if we see, you know, more embarrassing details about what Hannity did come out, or more embarrassing details about him, you know, actually trying to use his perch on the network to go after this raid because he was worried about something that might come out about his own conduct, you know, if that leads to a real impact on the company's bottom line, then we might see some change there. Absent that, I wouldn't hope for very much.
You know, in the overall book of Rupert Murdoch's businesses, Fox News is not the largest business. What Fox News provides Murdoch is access to the president. That's what I think at this stage in his life, what really matters to him, to be able to pick up the phone and have a good relationship. We have a post-truth presidency. We have a post-journalism network. The two are extremely well matched. And I can't imagine almost any scenario in which Sean Hannity gets forced out while Donald Trump remains in office. A great shame for many fine journalists who work at the network.
I was going to say, we won't paint the whole network with a broad brush, but certainly those primetime hours. Tom Winter, thank you for your reporting. Matt Miller, thank you for your analysis. Joyce is stuck with us a little while longer. When we come back, Donald Trump takes on the man he fired because he didn't like the way he was running the Russia investigation. Former FBI Director Jim Comey firing back in an explosive set of interviews last night and this morning, and re-upping the central question at the heart of the Mueller investigation. Does Russia have something on Donald Trump.
You're watching MSNBC International.
We will not be quiet.
This guy's behavior doesn't make any sense.
We will remain resolute.
This doesn't look good, General.
Asking what others aren't asking.
Why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
And wake up ready to do it again.
The full story never stands behind a podium.
Do you think this is a problem for the president?
It's too wily for that, far too elusive.
Do you believe this could be a cover-up?
So you think now is the time to have this policy debate?
The full story needs to be drawn out.
Is this new big wall going to stop Mexicans from coming to the U.S.?
Tracked down and boxed in.
There appears to be a clash between police and counter-protesters.
The full story is a long, long way from the headline.
You can see that.
And that's the distance we cover.
Hardball with Chris Matthews, only on MSNBC.
You disagree with me ideologically.
I do.
You talk about political correctness run amok.
This is about human rights. Do not go there. Does anyone want to challenge me on that?
Morning Joe, weekdays on MSNBC.
Flight 800, we had reports of a plane down, absent any graphics. We weren't quite up to the challenge of an instant map. There was a young man on our staff who remembered he had a road atlas in his trunk showing New York's Long Island. Without that, we wouldn't have had any visuals, any graphics at all. I remember seeing the flickering. That's fuel burning on the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. It was so sad for so many reasons.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, only on MSNBC.
Do you think the Russians have something on Donald Trump?
I think it's possible. I don't know. It always struck me and still strikes me as unlikely. And I would have been able to say with high confidence about any other president I dealt with, but I can't. It's possible.
Was President Trump obstructing justice?
Possibly. I mean, it's certainly some evidence of obstruction of justice. I don't think he's medically unfit to be president. I think he's morally unfit to be president. Values matter. This president does not reflect the values of this country.
That was some of what ousted FBI Director Jim Comey had to say about President Trump with ABC's George Stephanopoulos. The two issues central to the Mueller probe. Do the Russians have something on the president, and has the president obstructed justice? Here's how the president chose to respond, an unrelenting counterattack on Twitter. Of the 18 tweets he sent out since Friday, half of them were about James Comey. The highlights: proven leaker and liar. He should be prosecuted. A weak and untruthful slimeball. My favorite, this one. My great honor to fire him. Slimeball, jail. I hardly even knew the guy. Slippery Jim's I can't keep going. The panel's still here. Don and